So here we are. It is August, and it is time to return to school. And in some cases across the nation, students have already stepped foot into the schoolhouse. And in some cases, they're preparing, and families are anxious. And if we reflect on the last year, what a year it has been. I don't think any of us would have really been able to describe what our families and our communities have gone through. So returning to in-person classes after possibly being educated remotely, possibly doing some sort of hybrid education, or attending in-person learning the entire time, but with a layered approach of safety protocols, it has an impact. It has an impact on families, it has an impact on staff, on our communities. And to be really clear, this is not the first time in education that we have seen sort of this balance of physical safety and emotional security. After we went through the first school shooting, there were layered measures of safety and security in our schools that we had never had before. And so it's not the first time, but it is certainly a different time. So as we think about coming back into school, from each of your perspectives, Julie, you have a lifetime of preparing yourself to feel emotionally secure. So we'll start with you. Melissa, we'll go to you after that. But how would you embrace, or how are you embracing? You have a student, you have Case. In order to really come back to a community feeling and have students and staff members really feel as if they belong in school after the year they've been through.
Yeah, I was really inspired listening to the prior speakers because there's inequities throughout our society. There's food deserts, there's information deserts, and we have a lot of systems in place where we can begin to fix some of these things where people already are, and school is where people already are. And so I was really inspired to try and figure out how can I get some of the skills that I didn't learn in school. I learned things I needed. I needed math and English and all those things. But I also didn't understand how to be human. I didn't understand what to do with my feelings. I didn't understand what to do with my sadness. I didn't know what to do with my fear. And I've been talking a lot recently about how we went from village community life as a species to cities very, very recently. And when that happened, the village feel, a lot of our ability to connect and learn these skills all got siloed. So our medicine went into an office that might be in another city. Our healers were in a whole other place. We separated our physical health from our mental, emotional health and made those different things. We created education that happened in completely separate buildings where they all used to be intertwined. We learned how to be a human along the way. Pain is part of life. Diversity is part of life. We're built to handle it. We're built to adapt to handle pandemics. It's in our genetics. But in a matter of a few short generations, we lost a lot of the skills of, wait, what do I do with pain? Wait, what do I do with heartbreak? All of our hearts are destined to be broken, no matter what our background is. What do we do with those pieces? That's what makes us extraordinary. And so we have to find ways through these systems that already exist to put that type of information back in the structures that got deconstructed as we became an urban species. Long way of getting around to the answer. The more that we can create holistic curriculums, the more that we can create tools in our workplace, in our educational place that supports the human, is really important. Whether that's a boss for their employees and companies, whether it's companies like Castle that are encouraging and really creating a new bar that we have to learn social emotional learning while we're in math, while we're in history. Because, as Clarissa knows, as so many of the Youth Foundation and our foundation knows, we're dealing with hard things at home. We're dealing with really hard, broken down structures and a lot of heartbreak and a lot of things being torn apart, a lot of fear, a lot of trauma. Kids are showing up to school with trauma and hunger and a lot of really difficult issues. And then you put on top of it a pandemic, or you put on top of it the fear of gun violence at our schools. And it starts to feel overwhelming and insurmountable, but it isn't, because it looks like a complex problem that has a really simple root, and it's connection. How do I learn to connect with myself in a way that is good for me? How do I learn to connect with classmates in a way that is nourishing? How do I connect to adults, right? That was scary for me as a kid. I didn't want to connect with adults. They were scary to me. And how do we create that safety? More is being asked of our teachers. They're having kids trauma trigger in front of them. So we have to start equipping our teachers in a way that doesn't overwhelm our teachers and be just one more thing they have to do in an already overwhelming day. And it's very possible. That's why we created Cella together, was because you can start to create mindfulness tools and self-regulation tools and self-care tools that are just part of life, part of curriculum, that hopefully give everybody that space to honor. You know, trauma, if you want to boil it down to one really simple thing, is an experience you can't understand. It's too big. And you go into shock, and you can't process it. And if you don't have any space to process it, it's almost like calcifying in your system, and you get stuck. And every time your brain gets a little pattern trigger that reminds you of that, you get stuck. So a lot of helping people process with trauma is giving them space to understand it. What better way than writing? What better way than talking? Just keeping that energy and that experience fluid and moving, and we have such an opportunity to do that. And so it would be encouraging in our English classes and places where we can in school, like, how was your experience? Talk to me about it, write about it, to keep that type of thing moving so that we're reminded we're resilient, we can adapt, this is painful, but we got this, versus we're not gonna talk about this and we're just gonna move on, here's your history lesson. Long answer, sorry.
It's okay. It's a great answer. Melissa Castle, this is what you do, right? So talk to us about what advice you would give, again, students, staff, and parents to really come back to school and feel connected and part of a community like they belong there.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that, Jewel. And thank you, American Greetings. I'm really excited to be here. And what you were just describing, that you learned through your life's work, through your music, through your reflection, is actually something that there's an entire field grounded in science that supports exactly those same conclusions. 27 years ago, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning was founded to really help make sure that these things are part of education for all kids pre-K to 12, because we saw from the science that it is the key to academic learning, it's the key to connection, it's what the workplace is asking for future employees to have, it's what parents want for their kids, and it's what the kids themselves say that they are hungry for, is what some people call life skills, or how to really understand, who am I? How do I think? How do I feel? What matters to me? How do I fit in this community? And what can I do to put my energy towards working with others on the things that are most important to me? All of that is what we call social and emotional learning, and it's critically important, and there's decades of research that shows the benefits that it has to our mental health, to our academic performance. We have been advocating for this long before the pandemic, and we've seen a growing priority for this, in part because that research shows what an incredible impact it has on academics and graduation rates and engagement. And the pandemic has just sharpened our focus on the importance of it because of the sort of universal trauma that the world has been facing. And we know that as we come back to school, one of the most important things that we can do, as you've talked about, is build connection. We have kids and adults who have not really had as much connection as they need. They've felt isolated as they've been working from home, or they haven't had the structures in place that allow them to build that belonging. And belonging is at the core of everything. I'm sure everybody in this audience can think of a time that you were in a group where you did not feel like you belonged, and how distracting and uncomfortable that is. And you can also probably think of a group that you feel absolutely like you belong, and how relaxing and engaged you feel. What we really want to do is create classrooms where everyone feels a sense of belonging, they feel affirmed in their identity, whatever that is, and that they have the tools to engage the agency and the collaborative problem-solving skills that they need to be successful. So I would say the big thing about going back to school is to prioritize community building, relationship building, and belonging first and foremost, because that really sets the foundation for everything else.
We would agree. So let's just dig a little deeper, because we've talked a little bit about students and families and communities, but on the inside of the schoolhouse walls for the last 18 months, schools are stressed themselves, like the entity is stressed. Specifically in Ohio, we had 3 days to basically send everybody home and literally restructure schools so that it could still happen. We were directed, move student learning forward, but no one is allowed to come into school. And so we basically just took our brick and mortar model and we slid it over into some sort of online platform, and we did the best that we could. But we knew as educators it wasn't enough, it wasn't right, and we missed seeing our kids in front of us and the connection that we had with them. So everybody really did the best that they could, but that compounded their stress because they were also trying to help their own children learn. In some cases, they were dealing with spouses losing their jobs, possibly even losing their homes or having, the threat of having to move, because the world really was upside down. So when we came back to school last year, and again, whatever format or modality each school district came to, we still had a lot of schedules, right? Like we can only have so many kids eat lunch at this time, and we can only have so many kids enter into the locker areas at a certain time. And at one point, I actually felt like I worked for Kroger because Kroger was our vaccination partner across the state. And so it was my job to then start scheduling vaccination clinics. And we all know that those protocols and even just that word is hyperpolarized right now, right? Because people are just really in tune with their very acute feelings on where they are in the world. So let's talk about staff. As we bring staff in, and we know that the staff's mindset, the staff's disposition and attitude will yield direct results to the students that come into their classrooms.
Right.
What advice do you have for our staff members, our principals? I said this a million times. I'm a superintendent. I didn't learn anything in superintendent school that I did the last 18 months. Not once. Like, the closest I got was being a wedding planner and scheduling the vaccination clinics. That's the closest thing. And it was like a bad reception with families that didn't get along. Like that's really where we were. But we didn't learn any of this in school. They didn't teach us to educate during a pandemic or educate during mass shooting. That's not in our curriculum as educators. So talk to us, give us some advice for the educators that are oh so important. And this time I'm going to start with Melissa.
Absolutely. The adults in the building are critically important to take care of. And actually, again, back to the research is pretty clear that when adults have opportunities for self-care and for building authentic connections with each other, that they are not only better models for kids, but that you have reduced teacher burnout, better job satisfaction, and just more able to actually promote social and emotional competence for kids. So again, it is intuitive and it's backed by research that giving teachers opportunities to engage in those ways is a benefit to them and to kids. Also, I would say it's not just about the teachers. When we talk with schools about how to create an entire school-wide climate, it is about the teachers, it's about the custodians, it's about the cafeteria workers, it's about the bus drivers, it's about the security officers. All of them are part of that school community, and all are need to be tended to and create that sense of belonging together. And in fact, especially in some of our urban schools, the school community, sometimes the teachers don't actually reflect the immediate community, but sometimes the other support staff do, and that may be a child's best relationship is with the custodian or cafeteria worker or the librarian or what have you. So really making sure that it is an all hands on deck, we take care of all of our adults, and we recognize that every adult has an important role to play in the lives of our kids.
So true.
Point well taken. Very true. Very true. Jewel?
I was trying to think of the best way from my perspective to answer this. We all have things we want to accomplish in the day. We have an agenda. Things I think I need to get done that day. Those are all a luxury because when you're struggling, when you're suffering, none of it matters. And so we have to give each other space that for my friends that were teaching their toddlers at home while they were trying to keep a full-time job from home, they were so stressed because one of my friends, her daughter was in kindergarten and she wasn't able to do her Zoom classes. She was 5 and just couldn't pay attention. And my friend wasn't able to sit there with the child through those Zoom classes. And just reminding my friend, like, the only thing that really matters is how this child is going to look back on this time in their life. They're going to remember that more than they're going to remember a lot of things. And to focus on that environment, because culture is necessity, and we kind of have it backwards in our lives. We think the agenda is what's the most necessary and essential thing. But when you're dying emotionally, when you're hungry, those things are not a luxury. And so we can't just look at our culture as a little extra thing once we have time to get to it. The connection is the learning of humanity. And if we're not learning that, the gift, and tried to really work to get my son excited of like, we're built for this. Like, bring the pandemic on. Like, we're built for this. I don't know how we're gonna do it. Because I wanted, the thing we want our students to know, the thing we want our children to know is how to adapt. Because at work, it isn't really the technical aspects of the job, to your point. It's your ability to think on your feet and adapt and change and come up with a solution. That's creative problem solving. It's social emotional skills, it's pivoting, managing your stress. It's prioritizing, okay, I have to put my agenda out the window. Nothing else matters if I'm yelling at this person. I'm failing at both at that point. And that is stuff that we have to start valuing just as much as arithmetic and these other things, because as you said, nobody can learn math when they're depressed. It just doesn't matter. And we have to start thinking in these more holistic systems.
Awesome. So, even this event, right? Just a little, there are folks that were questioning, like, is it going to be inside? Is it going to be outside? Are there going to be groups of people? They're not going to, how are we managing? So that anxiety and just sort of the unknown, putting that left foot in front of the right foot each and every day, and learning how to navigate our new spaces, whether it's school or what have you. We know that parents, when we talk about the kids, that's our center focus, when kids are coming back to school, the message they hear and see every day comes from their parents. So we have encouraged parents to actually talk to the children, actually talk to your kids, practice. You're going back to school and there's going to be more kids in the room than there were last year. Or you're going back to school and you still have to wear a mask. So let's get that one out and practice. And, we've had some really great responses. We talk about student voice. And we don't necessarily take the time to listen to what the students are saying, and helping us as adults really shape our own attitudes. We always just think it comes from one end and goes to the students. It doesn't necessarily give us time to reflect on what the students think and bring it back. So, student voice. Talk to us, Melissa, about student voice and what impact that can really have in the adults setting the tone of life.
Yeah, we absolutely believe that young people need to have a voice in their own learning. And I think it's a miss when we have thought that the adults always know what's best. And what we've encouraged schools to do is, when they do these climate surveys and they learn about some kids are disengaged or some kids are not feeling connected, to ask the students themselves to help interpret the data and what solutions they would advise to help address some of these issues. The young people are brilliant and they come up with solutions that we would never have thought of. But so to really promote youth voice, it takes adults who are willing to create that space and listen. And it also promotes youth to have the opportunity to actually use their voice. There are lots of young people that are reluctant to speak up, and we haven't done a good job of fostering that. And if we want to raise young people who get engaged, become civically engaged, who talk about what matters to them, who require consent when they're in certain situations, we want them to find their voice, and we need to be providing opportunities for that. so that we can both hear from them and create a much better experience for them and promote those skills that they'll need for their entire lives.
So Jewel, between the curriculum that we have partnered and created, we tried to build that student voice in that agency and practices that allows them to talk about their future self, for instance, and really seeing them in the future with a quality aspect. So not just where do you want to live or what do you want to be when you grow up, but what kind of life do you want to have when you are an adult? What does that look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? And your input in that has been imperative. Your foundation also provides student voice, like probably, well, look around. I see you in the audience. Oh, Cheryl. She was the first student I met from the foundation. So the foundation does that really well as well. So talk to us about why that's important. Why is student voice important?
You know, we're talking a lot about what does create security. All of us are trying to figure that out, especially during these incredible times of upheaval. We try to find security through things that don't always add qualitative security, right? For me, for instance, I had a lot of trauma growing up, and I felt like if I became hypervigilant and tried to predict everything that happened, I could keep myself safe. I get it. I get why I did that, you know? Makes sense. It doesn't work. And it was exhausting because I apparently am not God and can't predict everything that's going to happen. Hard lesson to learn. And so you start going, what actually does help a psyche? What helps a person feel safe? And it's a hard thing and paradoxical to say it's my job as a student of life to show up, be on time, pay attention, and let go of the outcome. That fourth one's really hard because a lot of our life teaches us to really fixate on controlling the outcome. And it's literally anti-nature. You can't do it. And so you really are setting yourself up for failure. So what happens between that step 3 and step 4 of paying attention? The paying attention that when you're in harmony with right now, I'm able to tell something's uncomfortable in the room. Something about that person's making me uncomfortable. Something about that person is drawing me to them. It's that makes you feel safe. It's showing up right here. And as simple as that sound is also as hard as that is, because we live in a world that's constantly asking us to abandon ourselves, to abandon our own thoughts, to abandon our own present moment, to double down on a system that actually won't keep us safe. And all of life right now is built to help us live on the outside, and it distracts us. This does come back to our voice, because it is our voice inside of us that we are beholden to, that we're responsible to. And when I realized, I think it was when I was homeless and I was shoplifting a lot, I realized, oh my God, I think other people owe me. I think this poor shopkeeper owes me. The man owes me. The government, I didn't know what I was thinking. And I realized I owed me. I owed myself a lot. What was I capable of giving myself? I invented, and it's not because I'm special, once I made that switch of living from the inside, I invented more tools and more techniques than any therapist was ever able to give me. And we're each capable of that. That's what we teach in the foundation, is when these kids are able to sit down, no matter how anxious and triggered they are, and they start to listen to their own needs and get really curious about it, they hear a solution. And it's magical, because illness is an illness and illness is the cure. And so empowering adults, empowering children, the opportunity and rewarding them for when they stop, when they take a breath and when they get curious, because that's about to be the breakthrough. And so it's this funny line, right? How do I not over-empower my child who's 10? Because it creates anxiety, right? If you give a child too much empowerment, it makes them scared. But how do I empower them in a way that's growing them from the inside out and creating more strength? And that's something we're learning in society because it's changing every day.
That is a true statement. Everything changes every single day. So last question for us today, and I'd like to turn the conversation to this future-facing, forward-looking, hopefully not to ever have another pandemic. That would be great. But we can't ignore what happened. Like, we could all want to wish that we could just snap our fingers and be on the other side of it, but we're not, and it has happened. but there have been a lot of opportunities to grow in the midst of this. So how can we take those things that were actually good, those pieces of light that we actually embraced and we thought, this is what I needed, or this is what worked for me, and how can we really help transcend those and keep a hold of those? I like to tell our staff, like, we get to be the architects of what the post-COVID world looks like. That's kind of exciting, but yet we don't want to just like throw it all out because it was tainted with negativity and this bad thing. So how can we discern? How can we navigate through what the positives were and what we really should take with us through the pandemic? And if you could, think about if those are mindfulness pieces that existed before the pandemic, clearly. How does that connect? Are there things that we need to take to and through the pandemic, transcend to human skills, human life, to make life better, but also are there any connections to those mindfulness techniques that we know have been so beneficial to us even before? And Joel, I'm going to start with you.
You know, for those of us that are in this field prior to the pandemic, we felt like there was a pandemic already happening in the emotional realm. You know, suicide rates between 2007 and 2018 went up 70%. That was pre-pandemic. So we were really already struggling and seeing the signs of the aftermath, the side effects of disconnection: depression, suicide rates, violence, opioid addiction, pollution. All of those things are a side effect of a lack of connection. It's pain. And when you're in pain, you're going to behave in all of these myriad of ways. And so I think it's why people like you, people like us, have been so dedicated prior to the pandemic and trying to wave the flag of, hey, we have to pay attention because this is the common denominator of all these complex problems. And so the pandemic sharpened our focus, as you said, and I think made it really clear to maybe some people that weren't as aware of the problem that we have to find a way of incorporating holistic systems into the systems we have. The reason I wanted to work with you and create a language arts program was because I didn't want to create another siloed thing, right? That's what urbanization did already. It siloed and separated everything out. I wanted to put these human skills into a curriculum that kids had to learn anyway. They were already there to learn language arts. Why not also learn self-reflection and listening to yourself and curiosity and being present? I think we have to really value every single thing we come across as an opportunity and a teacher. That's what I hope for my son. This is here. We're dealing with it. What do we want to make out of it? And there were some great takeaways for me. And I think for the whole system, I think, you know, we stumbled into an industrial age of education during an industrial age of humanity. We're moving toward an AI future. We're moving toward a gig economy where they think 60 to 70% of our workforce of my kid's age when he's grown is going to be this gig economy where they have to hustle work. There's no major company now. You're putting work together. The skills they need for that are going to be resilience, being able to pivot, being to be highly creative, highly entrepreneurial, leaning into the unknown. All of these skills that an industrial model doesn't necessarily incorporate. So the time to do it is now, because my son needs to be trained now in those skills. And the pandemic's forcing us to do that. It's forcing us to innovate. It's forcing us to break down structures and realize, oh my God, we're relying on parents at home. We're relying on things virtually. Well, guess what? The whole world is going that way. Might not be this year. Maybe it'll change things forever. But there's things about it that work. There's things about it we can make work better. It's helping us realize our interdependence. It's helping us realize that if we're stressed, it doesn't matter if my kid's on Zoom or not. Like, this is a bad experience. So I think there's been a lot of silver linings. And if we can keep those and bring them back into hopefully a new homeostatic state and not just this acute stress state, I think it'll be great and will benefit a lot.
Awesome. Listen, we've got about 20 seconds left.
Okay, and I would just echo what you said about, to me, the pandemic was a moment of sort of slowing down and taking a step back from all the hustle and bustle, and an opportunity to really reflect on who we are, what we care about, and how we want to be and exist, and to really focus on some of the relationships with people that are closest to us in our house. I live with my husband and 13-year-old twins. We had a lot of together time. But it actually was a great reminder of what's most important. And so I do hope that we can take some of those reflective tools, you mentioned the mindfulness connection, to really not lose our opportunities to regularly reflect and value those relationships that are most important, so that we can continue to grow.
I value the relationship I have with both of you. So thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you for having us. Thank you for doing this again and putting this back on our calendars. And thank you for attending today.